Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we are discussing the secret vaults beneath Titan and the burial rites of the Grey Knights chapter. A spoiler warning to begin, as the events we're discussing today are from the Warhammer 40k story Grey Knights by author Ben Counter. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. Now, of all the secretive chapters within the Imperium, you'd be hard-pressed to beat the Grey Knights. I mean, their very existence is a secret guarded by the Inquisition. Anytime we get a peek behind the curtain of the chapter, it is undoubtedly an absolute treat. Really feeling like you're learning something new, seeing something you're not supposed to, treading on hallowed ground. And I guess you kind of are in our discussion today, when we get a chance to glimpse the secret vaults beneath Titan, where their fallen heroes are entombed, laid to rest, with their duty given to the Emperor. And this for me is a fascinating aspect of Space Marine life regardless of the chapter, learning just how they react and deal with their fallen brothers, what traditions or beliefs they have. And we get to see, in particular for the Grey Knights here, that their sacred duty has clearly had an effect on how they feel and deal with the fallen, in some ways retaining those Astartes characteristics, but in others becoming quite markedly different. We know for the Space Marines their journey always ends upon the battlefield, where the retrieval of the progenoid glands are priority. Their actual bodies are always far more a secondary concern, where a battle is always remaining to be fought. And this surely goes double for the Grey Knights, who look to the Emperor himself as their primogenitor, their primarch if you will, truly making their gene seed a precious resource. Yet for the Grey Knights, it's not just about giving their fallen brothers a warrior's send-off on whatever world they fall on. It's about returning them home, if they can, to Titan, to where they belong, laying them to rest beside their brothers within the chapter, ensuring their name can be honoured for the ultimate duty they perform. And thanks to the story Grey Knights, we actually got a glimpse of these revered catacombs beneath Titan, as a Justicar Genhain was interring his fallen brother Cray. They said you could feel the years on Titan, layers of history weighing you down. The truth was that Titan's gravity was slightly heavier than Terran standard, due to the superdense core that had been injected into the moon sometime during the lost dark age of technology. But there was some truth to the saying. History was literally etched into the rock of Titan. Faces of forgotten heroes, inscribed litanies of deeds once famous, murals depicting terrible battles against the forces of chaos. The whole surface of Titan was inscribed as if by a huge chisel, forming a network of battlements and citadels. It had been carved layer upon layer since before the dawn of the Imperium. There was so much history there it would overfill all the libraries of the Inquisition. If only it could be unlocked. Justicar Genhain wondered how much the Imperium could learn if its scholars could properly read all the images and messages that covered the walls of Titan's vaults. Beneath the upper levels of Titan, where the Grey Knights lived and prayed, were the catacombs where their dead were buried. Down here, there were vaults and tunnels carved by artisans from before the Ordo Malleus had ever been formed from the fires of the Horus heresy. As Genhain followed the procession down to the vault where his battle brothers would be buried, he saw the faces of Grey Knights in archaic marks of power armour, locked in endless combat with leering stone demons. A column was wrought to represent an unnamed saint of the Imperium. The names of battle brothers covered the vaulted ceiling. Grey Knights who had died in action, but whose bodies had never been recovered for burial. Genhain walked behind Chaplain Durendin, in full black power armour, the face of his helmet a skull of gunmetal grey. Durendin had walked these tunnels many times before. As a chaplain, he was the guardian of the dead, just as he guarded the spiritual health of the living brothers. Behind Genhain, the battle brothers of his squad carried the biers on which lay the body of Brother Cray, the dead Grey Knight from Squad Tancred, that Genhain had brought back to Titan on the Rubicon. Brother Karnos had died on Safano Secundus too, but his body had been left on the planet. Can you imagine what it must feel like to walk those tunnels? The sense of history and awe, reverence of being there. It must be nigh on overwhelming. Every chapter is filled with heroes of the Imperium, but the Grey Knights, you just know that each and every name down there was one of a legend. And immediately here, we get some pretty interesting revelations. How these tunnels had been begun before the very birth of the Imperium. Much like how the Imperial Palace itself was built upon much older history. And that, in truth, all these carvings, engravings, artistry by the chapter, most likely contains more sacred knowledge to thwart the ruinous powers than the Inquisition itself knows, and would know what to do with. As we know, the chapter was founded by Malcador and the Emperor, before the heresy even ended, and it's never stated anywhere, but this little glimpse of their history really shows us that the Grey Knights are probably second only to the Custodes in terms of ancient knowledge possessed, retaining their history, whereas so much else has been lost by the Imperium, intentionally or not. And we also learn how the Grey Knights honour those fallen who couldn't be physically retrieved, with their names being carved into the ceiling throughout the catacombs. A small thing, but clearly an important one for the chapter to ensure that their brothers' names are remembered. And we get a little glimpse here of the similarities to many of their Astartes cousins in this tradition too, with the chapter chaplains being responsible for the dead. Not just motivators for the living, but the guardians of those slain too, ensuring the chapter's spirit in life and in death. It's a side of the Grey Knight chapter I really never expected to see. However, the procession down into the vaults goes on. Cray was covered in a white death caul, draped over the huge plates of his Terminator armour. The shape of his nemesis halberd was visible, placed on his chest with his gauntleted hands folded over the hilt. Behind Cray's bier, several novices walked. They were young trainees who had only just begun the transformation into the Grey Knights. They carried the censers that filled the close air of the catacombs with the dark, spicy smell of sacred incense. Genhain remembered the time, almost hidden in the fog of psychodoctrination and endless medical procedures, when he had walked behind the funeral procession of a dead Grey Knight, and wondered how long it would be until it was his body on the bier, draped in white. The procession moved in silence through the catacombs. Here and there the walls opened up into cells cut into the stone, each holding the mouldering bones of a centuries dead Grey Knight. Here and there were the inscriptions on the floor, almost obliterated by the marching feet of countless funeral processions, detailing the names and histories of the battle brothers lying nearby. Genhain read fragments of names as he passed. Some of the dead down here would not even be recorded in the histories of the Grey Knights, having fought and died in times skipped over by the earlier records. Durendin reached the chamber where Cray was to be buried, and led Squad Genhain and the novices in. Several stone coffins lay on pedestals, perhaps 50 of them, ranged through the chamber. 3 of the pedestals had no coffin, and it was onto one of these that Cray was placed. Cray would lie there until Squad Tancred could return from the trail, when Tancred and Cray's battle brothers would remove Cray's armour and nemesis weapon, ritually cleanse his body, and oversee the chapter artificers as they built the coffin around the body. In the earliest days, great heroes of the Grey Knights would be buried with their weapons and armour, but the valuable Terminator armour could not be spared, and soon it would be worn by a Space Marine newly inducted into one of the chapter's Terminator squads. Maybe it's just me, but I think you can kind of understand why this is such an important duty to the chapter. Because of their founding, their sole purpose, the war against the great enemy, the ruinous powers. The Grey Knights alone truly understand the scope of what humanity faces, and so that perhaps helps them to realise how precious each life given in that war is, the cost that they must pay to keep the Imperium alive. For 10,000 years they have performed that duty, so long that the passage of time has eroded the names beneath their feet, so long that even their very traditions have changed, as we see with the knights originally being laid to rest within their armour, retaining their weapons, save the Terminator clad, which even the Grey Knights are forced to prize, such is its scarcity. And honestly, if there was a chapter out there who you would have thought would have an ample supply of Terminator armour, should at least have a steady supply, it's got to be the Grey Knights, surely. I mean, come on, these are the guys you call when a foe can't be defeated. There is nobody else. However, we also get to see a glimpse of how important that connection between a squad is, with the Grey Knights of course all connected psychically to each other. How the fallen brother will remain in state, within his armour, until his squad mates can return to Titan to cleanse and disarm him, even overseeing the construction of the coffin. An almost unbelievable level of respect to their fellow brother, and extremely telling of the nature of the chapter too. Now, what happens when an entire squad is wiped out? Who knows? You'd assume the chaplains will perform the role instead. Or in the gravest circumstances where they are all lost beyond recovery, their names will surely be added to those inscribed upon the ceiling and upon the floor. And such is this cost given by the chapter. It takes several hours to navigate the catacombs back to the life of the fortress monastery above. And still further down, there are the tombs of Grey Knight heroes dating back to its earliest of days, its founding by the Emperor, and a time when they were honoured not just by their brothers, but as the heroes of the Imperium each one of them were. A markedly different burial to the dozens of current day brothers sharing a single chamber. The tunnel curved downwards, describing a tight spiral that corkscrewed into the crust of Titan. Sculptures so old the details had been ground away by time lined the walls. Durendin's armoured footsteps echoed against the smooth stone floor. The air got warmer. Genhain saw glimpses of carved Grey Knights wearing long, obsolete marks of power armour, of which a handful of examples survived on display in the chapter's chapels. Exposed skeletons were all but handfuls of dust and gleaming white teeth. Some way down, the tunnel opened up into a huge underground chamber. It was so wide that the far wall was like a horizon, the roof like a sky of stone. Large, elaborate structures filled the chamber like the buildings of a wealthy, sombre city of marble and granite. "Our dead were not always buried side by side as brothers," said Durendin, his voice low in the silence. Few realise it, but the chapter does change. These levels survive from a time when the Grey Knights were buried like heroes in these cities of the dead. "How long ago?" said Genhain, almost unwilling to speak. Like every Grey Knight, he had fought truly terrible things and witnessed sights that would drive lesser men mad. But still, the oppressive, silent necropolis struck him with awe. "The last was just over 900 years ago," replied Durendin. "Follow, Justicar." Durendin walked out beneath the stone sky, down a broad avenue tiled with gleaming granite. Tombs rose on either side, many several stories high, each different. Carved reliefs of battles adorned some, others bore monumental carved symbols. The stylized eye of the Inquisition alongside the sword and book symbol of the Grey Knight chapter. Genhain saw a painted mural, the colours faded, of a Grey Knight in archaic Terminator armour, fending off a tremendous horde of pestilent, tentacled demons. Another tomb was topped by a massive marble Thunderhawk gunship, poised as if to ascend at any moment, carrying the soul of the Marine buried beneath it. Durendin turned a corner, and Genhain saw at the far end of the avenue a building shaped like an amphitheatre. Arches in the circular walls looked in onto an area where hundreds of stone figures sat silently, watching the raised obsidian block in the centre. Durendin entered the amphitheatre. It was huge, the size of one of the grand gladiatorial arenas that could be found in the Imperium's more brutal hive cities. The watching figures were hooded and cowled, and wore the symbols of the various imperial organisations: the Inquisition, Adeptus Mechanicus, Ecclesiarchy, Administratum, even the Adeptus Terra. The symbolism was powerful. Every man and woman of the Imperium, whether they knew it or not, owed an impossible debt to the Grey Knights. And what an image that is! A nigh-on city of mausoleums within the depths of Titan, where Grey Knight heroes were truly interred in the glory they deserved. They earned. And you have to wonder, just what was that amphitheatre for? Was that raised obsidian block within the centre to display the bodies of the fallen? Or does it contain a true hero of the chapter? One of those original founding few, perhaps? And if so, who? Lined with the gazing statues representing the other factions of the Imperium, it's almost as if the Grey Knights wanted to recognise the role they played for the Imperium to themselves, because it was a recognition that they would never receive in actuality. Their existence, of course, forever a secret. A symbolic sign of the Imperium giving thanks to maybe the latest fallen warrior, or an undoubted, unparalleled hero. If nothing else, it's kind of sad in a way that the Grey Knights at one point felt that they had to do this. That everything they go through, everything they sacrifice, the horrors that they protect the Imperium from, will never be known. I guess perhaps in a way that they could be envious of their Astartes kin, for at least their struggle is known by the wider Imperium. The names of their chapters heralded and revered as the legends they are. But if that is the case, you can kind of understand why this behaviour was stopped over time, as the chapter shouldn't need recognition for the role that they perform, as the only soul who matters already knows: the God Emperor. The Grey Knights deny the ruinous powers not for the plaudits of mankind, but to protect them. It's as simple as that. Yes, they are heroes. Undoubtedly the greatest of heroes. But they are heroes destined to never be known. To be unremembered. And I guess if there's one thing that this glimpse of the catacombs beneath Titan shows us, it's how that has moulded and shaped the chapter's character. Why and how it's become so important for the Grey Knights to honour and remember their fallen brothers. For the duty given to an Imperium that we'll simply never know. But as always everyone, what do you think? What do you think of these burial traditions of the chapter? Are you surprised that they go to the lengths of disarming their squad mates themselves, even supervising the coffin's building? And does it surprise you that the earlier Grey Knights of the chapter were buried in immense grand mausoleums? Is that deserved? Or perhaps a sign of arrogance within them? And what do you think that raised obsidian block was within the amphitheatre, gazed upon by the hundreds of figures representing the rest of the Imperium? Was it a platform to which the fallen heroes were perhaps displayed before burial? Or was it in fact a tomb of one of the greatest of the chapter? Even perhaps one of Malcador's original founders? And if so, who do you think it is? As always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. A huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.